Are you part of the great resignation, that mass exodus of people who are leaving their jobs to start something new? Then something you need to consider is what to do with your company 401k. Rather than just rolling it over, consider opening a truly self-directed IRA. With a self-directed IRA, a truly self-directed IRA, your retirement portfolio can include real estate, precious metals, cryptocurrency, notes, loans, a new business, and traditional equities like stocks and bonds. You can make any investment the law allows with a truly self-directed retirement account. Listen, you probably have questions, so why not take the time to get the answers? Start with going to IRAadvantage.com. Then talk to the truly self-directed IRA professionals at IRA Advantage.
Would you like to learn more about truly self-directed IRAs? Then visit IRAadvantage.com, view our videos, and call IRA Advantage. Let us set up a truly self-directed IRA for you. That's IRAadvantage.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a Wednesday, and it's honestly provocative talk for America. Try this for provocative. Is the Federal Department of Justice targeting political opponents who pose a serious threat to their power? You know, this problem's getting worse and worse. You remember that the FBI conspired against Donald Trump. They wiretapped American citizens. They put forward a piece of information, if you can call it that, the so-called Steele dossier, and they lied to federal judges and said this is solid information, when we now know that they knew at the time it was not. And you say, okay, that's really bad. When you've got elements of the U.S. government that have tremendous amounts of power, like the FBI, like the CIA, like the Department of Justice, and that they would actually knowingly take false information and use it as a political weapon against the opponents of those in charge. Well, consider this. According to Politico, the Justice Department is now suing the coal empire of West Virginia Governor Jim Justice. And why? They're going after the company because of failure to pay $5 million in civil penalties assessed by the Department of the Interior. Now, the 128-page civil action filed yesterday against 13 of the Justice family businesses, and Justice is the governor's adult son, comes as the governor launches a bid to run for the U.S. Senate against Democrat Joe Manchin of West Virginia. The suit says that the businesses failed to pay fines for more than 100 violations of federal mining regulations that created health and safety risks or threatened environmental harm. Now, the Justice Department's attorneys are looking for a court order to force the companies to repay the fines with interest. Republicans made it clear that they see this suit, without any kind of evidence, as part of a campaign of political targeting by the Biden administration's Justice Department. So in other words, if you decide to run in such a way, say for the U.S. Senate, to replace a Democrat with a Republican, that you're going to go after that person and you're going to do everything you can to damage them. When the party in power, in this case, the Democrats and Joe Biden, even though they don't have the House, they have the Senate, they have the presidency. If they say, if you decide to run against our people on the Democrat side of the aisle, even if it's Joe Manchin, who's not exactly done the things the party always wanted him to do, then we're going to come after you with every other element of the government. You understand? This is how you hold on to power and how you fool the voters by saying, well, we're going to go after that. Now, if you want to tell me, Donald Trump did the same thing. I said, can you show me any evidence that any agency of the U.S. government, when Donald Trump was president for 4 years, did the IRS go after Democrats? Did the DOJ go after Democrats? Did the EPA go after Democrats in the same way? And I'm sure somebody may be able to come up with some small example. But this is where you're saying, why you threaten us if we replace West Virginia's very conservative Joe Manchin, Democrat, with a Republican, Jim Justice, who's more conservative than that. Why that threatens the Senate power that the Democrats still hold on to. We'll come after you. We'll come after you with every element of the federal government. They have done it before. They will do it again. And as far as I'm concerned, that is the way that third world banana republics run. That if you're in power, you use the police, you use the prosecutors, you use any other element of the government you control to go after your political opponents, and you deny Americans. This is where it's important. Do I care that much about Jim Justice? I think he's a good man. But If you tell American voters, we're going to take away your choice, we're going to make your choice unavailable to you by using the federal government's power to go after people as political opponents, we're going to weaponize the government and we're going to use it to maintain our power, even if that steals away the choice from American voters. I just think that's dead wrong. So, glad to have you with me on a Wednesday. If you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every day, and I'm willing to let you take part. If you want to call in, it's 866-HEY-LARS. And if you happen to be a naysayer, why, you'll go right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. So if you disagree with me, you get a chance to go first. Or you can vote in our Twitter poll. That's another way to take part. There have been, in the last week, 2 infants who have died because parents left them in cars that got hot. They forgot all about them. One involves a case out of Puyallup, Washington, where a 1-year-old baby went to work with mom. The baby was in a car seat in the back seat. Mom got out of the car and went to work and didn't discover the baby in the car until 9 hours later when she came back out at the end of her shift. And unfortunately, the baby perished as a result of this negligence. And I think I can generically call it negligence, but here's my question for you. Anytime a child dies in a hot car because they were forgotten, should someone face criminal charges? My answer to that is yes. Every single time they should face criminal charges and then take it to a grand jury. If the grand jury, 12 average citizens, look at that case and they say, yep, we think you should be charged with negligent homicide, or we think you should be charged with neglect. Whatever it happens to be, the person should at least face the possibility of criminal charges. What happens in too many cases today? Well, mom had postpartum depression, or dad was distracted by other things that are going on, or a death in the family. 1,000 different excuses for why you would forget a 1-year-old baby, and in this case, a foster child. A foster child who you'd said, we want this child to be part of our family. We're going to provide foster care. The parents also had a second foster child. That child has been taken away from the parents for now. But here's the question. Should they face, or should the person who was responsible for that child's care face criminal charges? I would say yes, rather than a pile of excuses, and at the end of the day, the baby is still dead. You can find the question at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I've always believed in, so I joined the group years ago. It really is a rock-solid conservative group. Unlike AARP, I wouldn't touch those folks with a 10-foot pole. You can join amac.us is the location online, or 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. A shout out to our friends in Cortland, Mississippi, where they listen to Great Talk Radio on the Super Talk Network on WTNM. That's FM 93.7 in Cortland. And of course, you can find my show there as well. Second issue, the Supreme Court has now ruled that burning an American flag is protected speech. But what about burning a gay flag? Should that then be considered a hate crime? People who burn the American flag, I don't like it. I don't want it. I understand why the Supreme Court said it is free speech. But now, LAPD in Los Angeles is considering hate crime charges because a gay flag was destroyed outside a classroom at an elementary school. The school has been the focus of a group of parents who object to the Pride Day assembly that's coming up Friday, June 2nd, at which the school plans to teach kids, young kids, about LGBTQ+, and now they say it's a hate crime. Burning an American flag, no crime at all. Burning a gay flag, hate crime in America. Is that the direction we're going? Coming up in a moment, how would you like to go to work for a company that doesn't push its woke ideology on you? We're going to talk to an employment agency that's Lars Larson Show on a Wednesday. I can't tell you how many emails I get from people who say, oh boy, I'm at my work now and they've told me I have to go to mandatory training for DEI, CRT, or some other kind of politically correct nonsense. And they say, I really wish I didn't work for a company like that. Well, there's somebody out there who's anticipated your needs. His name is Andrew Krapuschutz, who is the founder and CEO of a company called Red Balloon. And don't look up just Red Balloon because you got a balloon delivery company in Seattle. It's redballoon.work. Mr. Krapuschutz, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Lars, and always nice to talk to you.
Well, tell me this. What inspired you to start Red Balloon, and where did it get its name?
Oh, well, I mean, if you are in any of these woke and work environments, you have, and for those who are, you know what I'm talking about. And for those who don't, let me give you kind of a window into the craziness that we're seeing right now. I actually got a note from a lady just this morning, works for a well-known hospital chain, and she has to take an anti-racism course every year. She's going to get fired. And they have optional courses that she can take on drag queen bingo. They make donations to BLM, and she says her highlight of the worst course that is optional for the employees is gender identity and sexual orientation. What's up with LGBTQIAA2S? So this is the kind of thing that these poor people are in and have to take in these corporations, and this is at a well-known hospital chain. So what we did is we saw that this wokeness is destroying the American workplace, and your ability to be free at work really has a disproportionate impact on your ability to be free in every other aspect of your life. And so Red Balloon was trying to be an answer to that, and so far, so good. We've had over 3,000 businesses and over 1 million job seekers on the site. It's called Red Balloon because if you've ever been on a hot air balloon, it's a little bit terrifying and a lot bit fun, kind of like looking for a new job. And people are moving to red states or red regions of blue states or red businesses where they can be free. And .work because .com sounded too much like communist to me, and we want to get back to work here in America. So there you go, redballoon.work.
I got to tell you, Mr. Crappy Sheds, I love this because there are times the marketplace has failed me where I said, well, if everybody's going this direction, somebody's smart out there. Like when all the banks say, we're going to start screening, and if you run a gun store or some store we don't like, a tobacco store, an oil company, we're not going to handle any of your accounts. We're going to kick you out of the bank. And I thought, well, somebody in banking has got to get smart enough to say, well, if they're all going that direction and abandoning, 40, 50, 60% of their customers or forcing them into a relationship with a bank they don't like, I hope the marketplace will provide an alternative. You're the first alternative I've ever heard of that would actually say, we'll find you a job with a non-woke company where you won't have to put up with that nonsense. And I think it's a great idea. It's the marketplace answer.
Yeah, well, and a lot of the companies that are on redballoon.work, I mean, they're writing me and saying, everybody that I'm hiring through redballoon.work is cleansing to my culture because they're just hardworking conservatives who show up and work. They're not a snowflake in the HR department whining about every little thing that happens. And the notes we get from job seekers when they are actually free at work. I actually talked to a lady down in Los Angeles this morning who found a new job at Siri & Glimstead, which is a law firm, through redballoon.work, and she said she didn't realize what an impact it was having on her kids when she was kind of living in this very grumpy, woke environment in her job. And when she was free, she's like, I realized that I was coming home grumpy all the time, and my kids were starting to adopt that behavior. And she said, it has changed the trajectory of our family to work at a company where I'm allowed to be free, where my values are respected, and I can live my values out loud. So I think a lot of Americans need to realize how much they're being affected, even if they don't realize it, by the woke work environment that they're in. And so if we can help people be free, man, it has been a fun business to run because we've been able to help so many people.
Well, and in fact, you'll end up representing a lot of workers, but a lot of companies. Are you getting any pushback the other direction from companies saying, we want nothing to do with that? We are, woke, we're PC, we're DEI, we're all this. You getting any pushback at all?
Well, we're getting some pushback. Wired Magazine went ahead and did a hit piece on me and on Red Balloon about how stupid it was for Americans to want to be free, because after all, we know that freedom is just a far-right construct, and the American flag is just a triggering mechanism for white supremacy. But of course, I'm joking, everyone. But so they pushed on us on that. But look, the businesses that are on redballoon.work, they're here because they want the best kind of workers. If you want to go and hire people who are woke and who are going to bring their political ideology and jam it down all the other employees' throats, you can go to places like Indeed.com and ZipRecruiter and find those people. So as you said, Lars, this is the market responding to a market need. And I believe it down in my bones that when we can be free at work and we need to allow for people to live their values out loud. So no, the companies on Red Balloon, they're there, they've signed a pledge because they believe in what made America great in the first place. And they want to allow people to work hard. And in a large, we're seeing this where a lot of companies like Bud Light, like Target, are realizing that if you are pushing an ideology that is contrary to what is traditional American values, that you are going to start to get penalized in the market. And so the companies on redballoon.work would never do any of those things. They're focused on what made America great in the first place. So it's been fun to support all of them.
Well, I agree with you because just today I was talking about a fire department where they had a meeting and now there's a major lawsuit being threatened and all that. Why? Because at the meeting, somebody who was woke said, hey, let's go around the table and introduce ourselves by our names and where we're from and what our pronouns are. And a woman at the table said, look, we're the fire department. We put out fires, we save people's lives. We don't do that pronoun stuff. And that person's under investigation. And you say, hold on. I keep wondering, at what point does woke and pronouns and all that become so distracting from the mission you're there to do, whether it's making a product, making a service, whatever it is you're doing? When does it become so distracting that the companies start to realize everybody's walking on eggshells, nobody can talk to each other, everybody's afraid they're going to end up in an HR complaint, and it distracts from the mission of the organization? Maybe that'll come, but I think a bunch of companies, like you said, Disney's suffering, and deservedly so. Target's suffering, deservedly so. Anheuser-Busch is trying to give its beer away and can't even give it away. But I just wonder if mainstream, companies are going to actually realize this is destructive and distracting and no good for anyone.
Well, I think it's going to take a minute because it has been a long time now that people like the Human Rights Commission has penalized businesses that did not adopt woke ideology. And conservatives, the right, has always spent their time just kind of keeping their head down, live and let live. And the left has been far better at penalizing businesses for not adopting their woke ideology. But it's really encouraging that some of the market forces, like consumers not spending money at Target, are having disproportionate impacts, right? Their stock's now down $13 billion. And I actually talked to a former Silicon Valley bank, and that did a historic implosion, a former Silicon Valley bank employee, and he said, they were forced to go through a weekly microaggression training inside the business. And the problem is a lot of the employees saw the credit risk coming and the bank was on the verge of collapsing, but they weren't allowed to say anything because if they did, it was considered a microaggression. And so I hope that a lot of businesses start to take notice of what's happening. When you go woke, you're absolutely going to go broke.
I think you're right. Andrew Krapuschetz is the man behind Red Balloon, and I can call you a man. I guess I could probably use that pronoun. I actually found
yes,
Andrew.
You can.
I on my email sig, I found the goofiest pronoun I could. It's wherewithal, which technically is a pronoun in some uses, and I put it up there just as my little way of saying all this pronoun stuff is stupid. The company bills itself as find a job that actually respects your values, and the man behind it is Andrew Krapuschetz. Sir, I wish you all the luck in the world. I hope a lot of people check it out, and I hope a lot of companies pay attention to this and the damage they can do. Be well and God bless.
Thanks for having me, Lars. Everyone have a great day.
You as well. Back in just a moment. I'll get to your phone calls and emails. What do you think? Would you go out and say, I want to find a company that doesn't care about pronouns and woke and PC and DEI, and I want to work for them? We'll be back in a moment. You've got the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a Wednesday. Your calls are welcome at 866. Hey, Lars, would you support your grandmother's decision to end her own life and get medical assistance in dying? The politically correct people call it MAID, M-A-I-D, medical assistance in dying. They apparently, years ago, they called it doctor-assisted suicide, which I thought was a whole lot more honest because you do get that assistance in dying from a doctor. And doctors are, of course, operating only because they have both state and federal licenses to practice medicine and dispense drugs. So it is the government signing off on assisted suicide. But here's where it gets really crazy. And I'll cite the work of thefederalist.com. Plus-size Victoria's Secret model and self-proclaimed self-love coach Allie Tate Cutler, went viral on TikTok recently for posting a disturbing series of videos in which she documented the upcoming assisted suicide of her seemingly healthy grandma known as Bubby. Cutler combined cutesy music with TikTok trends to repackage and normalize the state-sponsored killing of Bubby via Canada's Medical Assistance in Dying, which is known as MAID. In the most popular video, which has garnered more than 14 million views, Cutler, the granddaughter, and Bubby, the grandmother, do an outfit transformation, with Cutler writing in the caption, "My grandmother has chosen euthanasia for her terminal diagnosis, so this is the last time that I can take her out for dinner." Cutler attempts to normalize Bubby's impending doom by asking her grandmother to talk frankly about her decision. Bubby discusses how the injection, because in Canada apparently they do it with a needle, most places in America do it with a bottle of pills, will be relatively painless, and that she's looking forward to dying. Those are her words, looking forward to dying. She also explains that her decision brought her a sense of independence and control. Although I would point out parenthetically, every time people call me and try to talk me into the idea of doctor-assisted suicide, which I've literally been talking about for about 20 years since it first became legal, the first place on planet Earth where a government legalized doctor-assisted suicide was the state of Oregon. And that's where our headquarters studios are in the state of Oregon at our flagship radio station, KXL. I've said, hold on. If you decide that you want to take your own life and you ask me about it, I'm going to tell you I don't think you should commit suicide. I think you should enjoy and treasure every single minute of your life. But if you tell me you get independence and control by handing over the control of the doctor-assisted suicide to the state, whether it's a federal agency or in this case a state agency, in Canada it would be the federal government of Canada, how do you get more control over your life by asking the state, may I have your permission to commit suicide? I've never understood that thinking, because to put it bluntly, and I've said this as recently as a week ago to somebody calling the show defending the idea of medical assistance in dying, I said, hold on. If you decide to commit suicide today, is there anything the state can do to stop you? And most people who are sensible would say, no, you can commit suicide anytime you want. Officially, in most places in America, it's still illegal to commit suicide. And it's definitely illegal to assist somebody in committing suicide. So it's taken something that used to be a criminal act if you committed it. And most of the reason for making your own suicide criminal is so the state has some way to try to pull you back from the edge, literally rescue you from jumping off a tall building or a bridge or taking your own life. And that if you've tried to take your own life with a gun or with a knife or with pills, that the state has the ability to pull you back and allow you to think it through again. If you go to the state and you say, I can only commit suicide officially if you help me out, if you say it's okay. And then what you have to do is you have to take the state's definition. When is it legitimate to commit suicide and when is it not? Cutler does not divulge the reasoning behind Bubby's upcoming euthanasia, but it should be noted that Bubby does not appear to be in debilitating pain in these videos made by Allie Tate Cutler. If she is suffering some kind of illness, it seems unlikely she's either on her deathbed, given that she's living outside a hospital, she's well enough to go out to dinner with her granddaughter and make chipper little videos. And Federalist makes a great point. So here's an otherwise healthy woman, and you say, but Lars, she has a terminal diagnosis. In case you haven't thought about this before, every single one of us is born with a terminal diagnosis. Your life is only so long. Now, do you know how long it's going to be? Do you know if it's going to be 60 years or 70 years or 100 years? You don't know that. And you say, but this woman, Bubby, has a terminal diagnosis. Yes, all of us know that we're not going to live forever. So we all have a terminal diagnosis. Yes, but she's been told she'll be dead in a certain period of time. Apparently that is never shared in these videos that were created by Allie Tate Cutler. And I'll tell you something, I had a great friend. His name was Donovan Bass, and I worked with him, and he became a great friend over the years we worked together. He's no longer with us. Do you know that he had a terminal diagnosis as well? And do you know what his doctor told him? because I remembered at the time. He came and talked to me about it. He kept having back pain. And his doctor said, oh, you work out all the time. He was an athletic guy. And he said, you probably pulled a muscle. And the doctors kept telling him that till one doctor, he went to a different doctor. And finally, the doctor said to him, we've done the tests on you. I'm sorry, but you've got cancer back in your spine. And he wasn't an old guy. I don't think Donovan was yet 50 years old at the time. And the doctors told him after they'd done all the diagnostic tests, they said, you are likely to have 2 more years of life. And he and his wife, God bless her and God bless him, they decided we will, get the life insurance paid out early because you can do that. It's called viatical settlement. And they went off and they saw family in Mississippi, which is where he was from. They watched a space shuttle launch. This will tell you how long ago it was. They went on a cruise. They went to a bunch of museums. They did some things that were really fun while he was still healthy. He didn't get 2 years. He got 5 more years. The doctors were wrong by about 150%. They were wrong in the time he had left. And I guess I just wonder, when this young lady, who apparently is, popular on social media and all that, and she's a Victoria's Secret plus-size model and all that good stuff, when she hears her doctors for her bubby, her grandmother, tell her, you only have this much time left, do you believe the diagnosis? Or should you try to scrape every last minute that you can? And if life becomes too painful, do you know what was true when doctor-assisted suicide was first approved? It was true that we weren't that good about controlling pain. Today, they are very, very good at controlling pain. And yet still in all, this young lady seems happy that her grandmother is happy to go off to her death sooner than she'd have to. And I don't think that's right in any way, shape, or form. By the way, I want to remind you that Father's Day is right around the corner. Get Dad what he really wants. Omaha steaks, perfectly aged, always tender, and guaranteed delicious. The Father's Day experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to put a smile on the big guy's face this summer with hand-selected packages. Head over to omahasteaks.com and use promo code LARS at checkout. You'll get $30 off your qualifying order. You can choose from a variety of mouth-watering packages that include fork-tender, bacon-wrapped filet mignon and other gourmet grillables like air-chilled boneless chicken breasts, burgers, jumbo franks, and many more. Don't forget to save room for dessert, though. Most gift packages come with 4 delicious caramel apple tartlets. I get hungry just talking about it. Go to omahasteaks.com and use my name, Lars, L-A-R-S, at checkout and get $30 off an unforgettable gift that is guaranteed to make Dad's day. Because if there's one thing we absolutely know, it's that dads want steak. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code Lars at checkout. Minimum order required. See the site for details. omahasteaks.com, promo code Lars. You're listening to the Lars Larson Show with the hardline Republicans and progressive Democrats, both raising concerns about the debt ceiling deal made between Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy after Joe gave up his 3.5 months of not negotiating at all. It might actually pass, but if it does, is it actually going to rein in control on the, I think, out-of-control IRS? Grover Norquist joins me now, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Grover, good to have you back.
Hey, Lars, good to be with you.
What are you thinking is going to happen to this deal that McCarthy and Biden cut over the weekend that seems to make nobody happy?
Well, we just had a vote, so they will move forward and have the vote tonight, the vote on the rule. And it looks as though it'll pass with almost all the Republicans voting for it, maybe 40 or 50 not, but enough Democrats voting yes that it will get across the finish line. The real progressives, understandably, are unhappy. Here's the good news. It takes $20 billion. Remember, the Democrats had already voted to give $80 billion to the IRS to play with.
Yep.
And this takes $22 billion away from them and says, you don't get that. And while that's good, 25% cut in the IRS supersizing, interestingly, the Washington Post reporter said, you know what, this scares Democrats because now this $80 billion, now $60 billion, becomes a slush fund for other things. So when the Democrats look and say, we'd really like more money on welfare or this, that, the other thing, the one thing the Republicans will let them take the money out of is the IRS budget. And we did that with $20 billion so far, and we can keep going. So we're beginning, and it does tell us that word has gotten out to the American people that the IRS has corruption problems, power problems, should be reined in, should not have guns, or 5 million
An
rounds
army.
of ammunition.
Yeah.
An army, yes. So this is a very interesting step in the right direction. You know, CBO scores things. It's somewhere between $1 and $2 trillion over 10 years, less spending. That's good, but it depends on who wins the election 2, 4, and 6 years from now. So that you don't know. But what we did get is the $20 billion out of the IRS. We did get a law which says, assuming this all passes, a law that says, remember when Biden promised he was going to tell people who owed the money on their student loans that
Yep.
they'd have to start paying interest? Well, he said he was going to do that later this year. This makes it a law, so the Biden can't, keep promising. That's a big deal. It's $5 billion a year, a month, $5 billion a month. There are. The other one is, in this deal, in addition to reining in the IRS, slapping it sideways. I mean, if you were the IRS a couple of months ago, you're going, you know what? We've done all this crazy stuff. We go after Chiabi, the reporter. We on New Year's Eve, this administration decided to start looking into Chiabi, the reporter who had written about how the FBI had corruptly worked with the pre-Musk Twitter world to censor people. Here we have the IRS. This is Stasi. It's East German stuff, right? This is crazy, awful
It is.
stuff. And nobody was mad at them, or they didn't think anyone was mad at them. Nobody had punished them. Matter of fact, the Democrats had said, all that stuff you're doing, here's $80 billion. What do you think we're telling you? We're patting you on the back and going, attaboy, do more of that. And all of a sudden they get slapped in the face and people start grabbing that money back and said, which is the weakest constituency in this town, the one we can take the money from? You, because you messed up. So maybe we have a slightly shook up IRS, half as scared of us as we are of them. And this is a huge step forward. I mean, when they went after Chiabi, the liberal reporter, but he wrote about things that embarrassed the FBI and the IRS started to investigate the reporter Chiabi. The IRS is investigating a reporter. Okay, that's awful.
It is.
But they started the investigation on Christmas Eve, Saturday. Who's in the office on Saturday before Christmas?
Federal employees? No, the janitor maybe, and probably not even that.
And so they're setting up this thing. Maybe they went in so that nobody would know that they were doing it. But and they start this investigation. And what do they ask for? Does he have a concealed carry permit? What business is it of the IRS on that? They're looking into his hunting and fishing licenses. I mean, this is sick. This is scary. Okay, this is movies that you see and oh, come on, nobody does that. Yes, evidently they do. And then 3 months later, when Chiabi's testifying before Congress about the corruption of the FBI, the FBI calls and says, would the IRS do something to go after this guy? That's scary in and of itself that these agencies are talking. The FBI is, if we investigate somebody, we have to get a subpoena. You're the IRS. The courts say you don't need subpoenas.
Yep.
You can just do it. So they hand over to the IRS, please go after a guy we don't, and the IRS, do they say go to heck? No, they say, fine. How do you want us to jump?
Well,
and so, yeah.
I mean, think about this, Grover. We've heard for decades now that federal agencies can't coordinate their actions to the point where, one agency knows there's a guy learning how to fly an airplane flat and level, and the other agency knows that he's a terrorist suspect or tied into other people. They say, oh, but we can't possibly share information. And all of a sudden, but when it comes to politics, all of a sudden, they're able to share information and coordinate all their activities like they're the A-team or something. This is how evil they are. They can't do it to protect the country. They can do it to protect the politicians they love.
And this is scary. And we're finally in this budget deal slapping the IRS on the side of the head very hard. I'm sorry, but $20 billion is real money, okay?
Yeah. For one agency, yeah.
Well, and this is now. What do we do next year, right? One of the things that this budget deal says is you have to have 12 appropriations. There's supposed to be 12 different things: the Defense Department and the Justice Department and these sorts of things. And if you don't pass those 12 for the total budget, we cut 1% across the board, which with 5 to 6% inflation, that's not a 1% cut. That's a 6 or 7% cut. This is the real serious cut across the board. So Congress is going to work very hard to do this. Now, once you've done that, all of a sudden, you know what? If the IRS had less, I'd have more. And the IRS is now the wounded deer being hunted by wolves. And it's all of its friends are going to go, you know what? Take another bite out of him.
Absolutely. Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a Wednesday, and it's honestly provocative talk for America. And before I go to your calls, we got a couple of naysayers. I want to get to those as well. But the question comes to me all the time, what happened to Kari Lake? Kari Lake, who was, I think, elected as governor of Arizona. Not Katie Hobbs. But Katie Hobbs, who was both the Secretary of State, meaning she was in charge of the election in which she got elected as governor. And there were a lot of suspicions about things that had gone sideways in that election. Well, now we've got some new information, and it's cited by the folks at Gateway Pundit. A new video exposes Maricopa County's secret machine tampering, meaning the machines that count the ballots. What did they do with the machines? They reprogrammed them. They reprogrammed them on October 14th, October 17th, and October 18th. So that 59% of those machines would actually fail when Republican voters came in to vote on Election Day. And Maricopa County was reprogramming its machines, and this is critical, after they had been certified. So imagine this. You certify the voting machines, they're ready to go. And then you come in and do reprogramming and then had errors on Election Day when the machines failed to tabulate ballots, causing massive lines, wait times, and literally disenfranchising voters. I'm sorry, the machines aren't working. Well, why not? They were certified, weren't they? Yes, but then we reprogrammed them 3 different times after they were certified, and they have a video to prove that it happens. The video cites Maricopa County Elections Director Scott Jarrett's declaration, where he attests under oath that this is what happened on Election Day. Are you still satisfied that Katie Hobbs won that election? Absolutely not. In any case, welcome to the show. If you want to jump into what we call the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every day at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com and vote in our Twitter poll. You'll find the question at Lars Larson Show. Already in the last week, 2 children in America have died. Babies left in hot cars by negligent parents. And in that case, when any child dies in a hot car, Should someone face criminal charges? I would answer that one yes. You can answer any way you like at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group, and you could too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. Let's go to Steve, who's a naysayer. Steve, very quickly, tell me what you and I disagree about.
Yeah, well, the conversation on the euthanasia thing, I mean, the scenario you painted, that I've seen that before as well, but then my
Which scenario? Which scenario? Where the young lady with her otherwise healthy grandmother says Bubby is happy to take her own life, even though she was apparently healthy enough to go out to dinner with her granddaughter? That scenario? Or which one? Because when you say the scenario, we've talked about a few things.
She had a short amount of time to live.
No, we don't know that. We don't know that, Steve. She has a terminal illness. There are a lot of terminal illnesses that take your life in 20 years. There are terminal illnesses that take your life in 6 weeks. We don't know how long it was. She never says.
Sure. No, I know it's a gray area. I have two scenarios. Good friend from home in Australia. She was given 3 weeks to live, and she lived a year.
Yep. Should she have
personal
offed herself in 3 weeks instead?
Getting towards the end of it, she might have been better off. But my personal scenario was watching my wife die, and
I'm sorry to hear that.
We did it. Yeah, we did she did a non-resuscitation thing and everything, and it just really dragged on. And in the end, she couldn't eat anymore and died of starvation.
I'm sorry to hear that. They couldn't put her on a feeding tube. They couldn't give her other kinds of nutrients.
Well, she had already agreed to that wasn't what she wanted.
Well, if that's the way you want to go. But hold on, Steve. Steve, that's very different from doctor-assisted suicide, where a doctor gives you medicine designed to kill you. That's different than saying, I've chosen to stop eating, I've chosen to stop drinking, and you go that way. That's your choice. When you say to a doctor, give me some medicine, either through an injection or a pill that will kill me, that's a different act, isn't it?
But my point is that I didn't really want to see her, and I don't think she wanted to be starved to death for 2 weeks and would have just preferred. And we'd already sort of talked about it in the earlier.
So you're in favor of it. Okay. So tell me this. How broadly will you go? Canada keeps broadening the definition of who qualifies for doctor-assisted suicide, including the mentally ill, including children, including people who have illnesses that will eventually be terminal. But then again, Steve, all of us have a terminal diagnosis. None of us is going to live forever. So where do you and I disagree? I'll go back to my original question that you still haven't answered.
It just has to be an option somewhere. I mean,
and who should control that option? The state or the individual?
She had a specialist hospice doctor. I mean, I guess that would be a sort of person you would get involved.
Do you want to invite the state in to make that decision with you and say, you qualify for suicide, you don't?
Well, the state's not paying for insurance.
I didn't ask who's paying for it. I ask who's signing off on it. Because right now in most states, if you help somebody commit suicide, you're committing a crime. This is where the state says it's okay for some people to help you commit suicide. So I can't seem to get a question out of him, so I'm going to go to a different naysayer. Hey, Matt, what do you and I disagree about first?
Well, I don't know if it's you and I, but the last guest that you had on there that was talking about we made a great big win about going from $80 billion to $60 billion for the IRS, and he thought that was a great big win. So enlighten me about what his big win was.
His big win, according to Grover, and Grover has worked tax policy for decades, the big win was you managed to get some of the IRS cut back. The Democrats, when they were in control, gave the IRS $80 billion. As of a week ago, the IRS wasn't going to lose a dime of it. Now they've lost $20 billion. Now, you say, well, we want a bigger win. Well, I'll tell you what, then give us...
How much money does the IRS need? 60 more.
I don't think they need any of it. Matt, I agree with you.
Thought it was a great win.
Matt, I agree with you. They don't need any of it. Do you know how you get it back from them? You have a majority in the Senate, which we don't have. You have a president in the White House who signs the bill, which we don't have, and you have a bigger majority than 5 votes in the House of Representatives. We don't have those things right now.
What we have a Republican. What's going on here is that we have Republicans that don't have a backbone, that can't stick up for themselves.
Well, tell me this, Matt. When you only control a
Republican anymore.
Matt, when you only control a majority by 5 in the House and you're not a majority in the Senate and you don't have the president's signature, you're not dealing with you don't have a lot of cards in your hand at that point. But Matt, thanks for the call. Back in a moment. When a Republican wins the White House next year, they're going to need a lot of changes. But should their first act be firing the head of the DOJ and the FBI? Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show on this Wednesday. It's a pleasure to be with you. And when a Republican wins the White House next year, I'm very confident that Donald John Trump is going to win the presidency in November of next year. He's going to have to make a lot of changes. And should those changes start by firing the Attorney General and firing the head of the FBI? Reverend James Harden joins me now, who's CEO of Compass Care Pregnancy Services that runs pregnancy resource centers for young ladies. Reverend Harden, welcome back.
Lars, thanks for having me back. It's an honor.
Well, it's my honor to have you. I mean, you and your group do such important work. And if people aren't familiar with pregnancy resource centers, I've got no dog in the fight directly other than supporting what you and the centers do. A young lady is pregnant. She thinks her only option is an abortion through Planned Parenthood or some other clinic. And Compass Care Pregnancy Centers says, no, as a matter of fact, we can open up a lot of other options like keeping your baby and raising that child, or keeping your baby and giving it up for adoption to a loving family. All of those are possible. It expands the possibilities dramatically. And yet your pregnancy resource centers generically have come under physical attack, firebombs, ransacks, vandalism, looting. And the DOJ doesn't seem very concerned with catching those responsible for those acts of terrorism at all.
No, not at all. In fact, you described it perfectly. When a woman faces unplanned pregnancy, she feels like she's got no choice at all. And that's the way, apparently, the pro-abortion politicians in charge of the Democrat Party want to keep it. They want to protect the abortion industry rather than women. That's why they're calling us Christian fascists. They're calling us, honestly, they're calling us Christian fascists. They're saying that we're terrorists because we're forcing women to become permanent socioeconomic underclasses and enslave them to their babies. This is you can't make this stuff up. And here we are getting attacked for providing ethical medical care, comprehensive community support, and all for free, because all we're doing is providing women with informed consent and options, literally freeing her with the ability to say no to an abortion. Somehow that's dangerous to pro-abortion politicians. Somehow that is threatening to pro-abortion Antifa groups, because that's who's doing this. This is Jane's Revenge. Jane's Revenge is this group that is basically a front group for Antifa. It's a Marxist, Maoist insurgency that's essentially attacking the Judeo-Christian roots of the free market, constitutional rule of law. So when the Biden administration, the upper echelons of government and federal law enforcement give a pass to these people, which they're doing, over 300 attacks on pro-life entities since the illegal leak of the Dobbs case last May, and they're giving them a pass. There are no convictions, none. Even on our firebombing and our second attack and vandal attack, they're refusing to press charges, FACE Act violations, et cetera, et cetera. This represents, I think, an infiltration in federal law enforcement, and it requires from the president. You mentioned Trump or whoever gets elected president.
Yep.
It requires that they address this problem. You cannot solve the problem by firing Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI. You can't solve the problem by firing Merrick Garland. You've got to impeach them, certainly now. But this goes deeper than the 7th floor of the FBI building. This goes all the way down to the rank and file. You've got guys coming out of the FBI who are essentially saying what we've been saying since we were firebombed. The FBI is more than slow walking justice. They are actually participating in colluding to deprive pro-life citizens of equal protection under the law, which is the 14th Amendment. And they're also colluding to deprive pro-life people of their First Amendment rights to exercise their religious liberty and their freedom of speech. And so they've actually turned their investigative and arresting power on pro-life people. This is what whistleblowers from within the FBI are saying. And now I've got the folks out of the DHS, Department of Homeland Security. It's come out that they're actually profiling peaceful pro-life moms as potential domestic terror threats and investing $40 million taxpayer-funded dollars in institutions to investigate Republicans and Christians. What is that?
You mentioned Reverend Hardin, you mentioned at the beginning fascists, and this fascism. I'm convinced that a lot of people who use that term don't know what it means. Fascism is where the state is more important than the individual. And of course, the kind of government we have is where the individual's rights are paramount, even over the interests of the state. And you say, well, that sounds kind of technical. Here's what it means. If somebody accuses Reverend James Hardin of murder, and then they violate your rights. They force a confession from you. That's Fifth Amendment. They unreasonably search your home. Fourth Amendment. They do any of those things and they violate your rights. We literally have an obligation under the Constitution to let that individual go. Why? Because the right of the individual, the civil rights of each individual citizen are paramount. So when people say, well, this, pregnancy resource centers are fascist, they've got it upside down. The pregnancy resource centers say, we want to recognize the right of that individual mother to have more than one choice. And what the Biden administration has said, our official position as the government of the United States is that there is only one choice. If you don't want the baby dies. That is fascism. That's saying the state's interests come first and the individual, both the individual mother and the individual baby inside her, comes second or not at all. So it is actually fascism, but it's fascism by the Biden administration saying the position of the state, the Democrat state, is that abortion should be the only answer to a pregnancy where somebody has any questions about whether they want to keep the baby or not. Your answer is no. You've got the choice of abortion, sadly. You've also got the choice of adoption, gladly. You've got the choice of raise the baby yourself with some resources provided by the pregnancy resource centers. You've got three choices. Joe Biden's people say, and his Democrat friends say, you have one choice, kill the baby. And to me, that's the real fascism. And when the DOJ says, if you attack a Planned Parenthood clinic, we're going to bring the full resources of the FBI and the DOJ down to find those responsible. But if you attack a pregnancy resource center, we're going to kind of turn a blind eye and say, we didn't want those guys around anyway. Just let the bad guys go and let the crimes happen.
You're exactly right. I mean, fascism, is exactly what the Biden administration is promoting. They're engaging in what I call political transference. They're blaming their perceived political opponent for their own sins. And so, why are they attacking pro-life people, though? Why are they attacking Christian pro-life people? And I think it's because of what we believe. The belief that pro-life Christians are able to articulate is the primary belief that stands between tyranny and a free rule of law. And that is that all people are made in the image of God and therefore equally valuable without qualification. What does the Declaration of Independence say? But we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And what the Biden administration wants to insist upon is that we are not endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights, but endowed by our government with fabricated ones. Because every time the government fabricates a right, like abortion, it will automatically compete with the inalienable one, like life. And by the way, the right to life presupposes all other rights. So we've got to find a way for the government to understand and for government officials to understand that it is not the job of government to define who qualifies or is disqualified from personhood protection under the law.
No,
We've got to find a way as a society to return to a humane and civil understanding that all people ought to be protected under the law, and that includes a blind justice system.
And we don't have that right now. Reverend Hardin, I appreciate the work you do in the Compass Care Pregnancy Resource Centers. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time. By the way, folks, I got a little advice for you. If you're a small business owner who could use a few $100,000 and who couldn't, employee retention tax credits, they're an incredible opportunity. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic, and they've already helped out over 1,500 small business owners. And what did they get? About $300 million in funds. And they know what they're doing. Get My Funds has a team of CPAs who specialize in filing for those tax credits, and they're with you every step of the way, even if there's an audit. They stand behind their work with an audit safeguard. If you retain 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, even if you already got the PPP, you need to call Get My Funds now at 800-535-2950. It's not a grant, not a loan. It is a tax refund. No upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Go with the team you can trust at Get My Funds. 800-535-2950 or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com, and you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It seems to me that John Kerry, and I've never had much use for John Kerry, and I could go on and give you chapter and verse about the creepy way this guy has behaved throughout his political life. But John Kerry is trying to make U.S. farmers go extinct. And that is just absolutely dead wrong. I want to give you the details on that and a couple of thoughts from me. But first, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. If you want to jump into the best conversation in talk journalism, it happens right here every weekday at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. And if you happen to be a naysayer, we have for more than 26 years said to naysayers, if you disagree with the host of this show, why, you not only get on the show, will you not only get a chance to make your comments, but your comments will go first. We put you right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. You can send emails to talk@larslarson.com. And, of course, you can answer our Twitter poll. We put up a brand new question each and every day based on the news of the day. Now, it happens that in my neck of the woods, a couple of 100 miles away, there's a town called Puyallup. And I remember Puyallup because when I was a little kid, my dad was a national park ranger at Mount Rainier National Park for about a year. And I wasn't even in school at that point, but I'm old enough to remember it. And I remember going to the town of Puyallup. That was the big city. It wasn't Seattle or Portland, it was Puyallup. Well, in Puyallup, something really horrific and tragic happened. About a week ago, there was a young lady who had a foster child. She and her husband had a foster child. And the foster child, they actually had 2 foster children, but one of them was a 1-year-old baby. And she drove to work last Wednesday morning. And she then went into work. And she worked for 9 hours. And at the end of the day, she came back out to her car. Now, her car, even on a relatively mild late spring day, had reached over 100 degrees inside. And it turns out the 1-year-old baby was inside that hot car. And the 1-year-old baby did not survive. The baby perished. The police are still investigating. They're considering the medical examiner's report, and they're making a decision about whether or not charges should be brought against the negligent parent who left that 1-year-old baby in the car. So I'm going to ask you the question this way. When any child dies in a hot car, should someone face criminal charges? To give you an idea of how ubiquitous this problem is, there have already been 2 babies die in the United States in the last 7 days. And I know that as we get into the depths of summer, we're going to start seeing these stories over and over and over again. And it is absolutely criminal, and I mean that both literally and metaphorically, that when a baby dies in a hot car, a child of any age, whether it's a baby, a toddler, a young child, when a parent negligently leaves a child in a hot car, should somebody face criminal charges? My answer to that is yes. You can answer our Twitter poll any way you like, at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group many years ago. You can join too. Just go to amac.us or call them up. 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. Now, in yesterday's Twitter poll, should the United States end all birthright citizenship for illegal aliens? 68% of you said yes, as did I. But I was kind of surprised. A third of you, 32%, said no. we should not end birthright citizenship for illegal aliens, even though I explained why under the 14th Amendment, you don't even have to be a lawyer to understand that under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, you are only a child of, you're only a citizen if you are born on American soil and you are born subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And in this case, that would not apply. So glad to take your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Now, about that gas bag, John Kerry. I've told you I have very little use for him. I'll give you the reason, specific reason, that is the new reason to not think much of the gas bag former presidential candidate, former U.S. Senator, former Secretary of State, now the climate czar for Joe Biden. So what does he do? He sits on a stage next to another evil character named Bill Gates. And what does he tell people? He says small farms in America and around the world are significant emitters of nitrogen. And according to John Kerry, he wants the U.S. government to crack down on farming in the United States because of global warming. Kerry says the United States must massively reduce farming to meet the radical green agenda laid out by another evil group and Klaus Schwab, another evil character at the World Economic Forum and at the United Nations, another group that we should pay almost no attention to. According to John Kerry, the world can't tackle climate change without reducing farming. I mean, it's almost hard for me to believe that somebody could be this nonsensical. About 50 years ago, there were people who believed, as Thomas Malthus, the famous guy who came up with the theory, that food production by human beings on planet Earth could never keep up with the growth of population. Now, think about the implications of that. If it had been true, it never was true because human beings are endlessly inventive. So, what did human beings do? We figured out how to grow enough food, not just in the United States, but around the world, to make sure that a population that is close to 8 billion people on planet Earth can actually have enough food to eat. And the only place that people are still hungry is where dictators and tyrants restrict the supply of food to their population because it gets them power. But here's what John Kerry said. A lot of people have no clue that agriculture contributes about 33% of all carbon emissions of the world. We can't get to net zero. We can't get this job done unless agriculture is front and center as part of the solution. So here's John Kerry saying we've got to cut down on farming, sitting right next to the guy who's the single largest individual owner of farmland in America, Bill Gates. And they're all conspiring to start to choke us. They're going to choke us down, and this is just dead wrong. We need to really pay attention to this. Just remember who this guy works for. He works for Joe Biden, but he works in concert with actors like Bill Gates. I can't tell you enough about the bad things about Bill Gates, but for Bill Gates to be a major farm owner and then to sit next to John Kerry, as John Kerry explains how we have to wipe out small farmers in America because growing food for human beings is evil to planet Earth. This is the kind of nonsense we have to put up with because of Joe Biden and the people around him. To your calls now. Let's go first to Mark. Hey, Mark, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
Lars, how are you?
Quite well, thank you.
Listening to you talk about the foster child that died in the back of a car because the foster mom went into work and forgot the child was there. That is unconscionable to me. I'm a 56-year-old male, raised 4 kids, and I'm raising a grandson right now. And I totally agree. She should be tried with to the fullest extent of the law. How you can be so self-absorbed to forget that you have a child in the backseat of your car is unbelievable to me.
Well, and Mark, I don't have any biological kids, but I have a granddaughter, and I've been in her life, literally from the moment she was born. I was, I think, the third person after mom and dad to hold her. I was the third person to hold her. She's now 7 years old. Every single time that I've been the sole adult in charge of her, which happens from time to time. You know, mom will go off run an errand. My wife, Nana, the grandmother, will be doing something else. If I'm in charge of her, that is the number one priority in front of me. When I'm in charge of her, nothing distracts me from her. And why? Because she's the most important thing that I have a responsibility for. Mark, I appreciate the car. Back in a moment. Call. Joe, one of the things that people like me look forward to in the month of June is that we're going to get some of the biggest decisions that the U.S. Supreme Court makes. They're routinely rolled out in June, unless, of course, there's a leaker that nobody, including the FBI, can actually find, like there was last year. But as we get into June, the Supreme Court is expected to announce its decisions in two cases that challenge all that nonsense about race-conscious admissions to college. So I thought we'd talk to Ken Tashi, who is a campus reform higher ed fellow and a former general counsel for more than 20 years for about 15 different higher education institutions. Ken, welcome to the program.
Oh, Lars, thanks very much for having me.
Let's start with a basic question, and that is, should race at all be a factor, any factor, big or small, in deciding who gets into college and who doesn't?
My position is no, it should not be. When the court permitted the use of race about 20 years ago, it was narrowly limited to be considered as just a factor in admissions in higher education. But over the years, that's really morphed into a consideration of race to be a predominant or a determining factor, and it was never considered to be such. And I believe there are some real negative consequences as a result of the continued use of race in higher education admission. And I think it's going to weigh very heavily on the court moving forward in their determination that race is no longer going to be a factor, and they're going to move higher education in a different direction for purposes of admission decisions.
I mean, because if you allow it to be any factor, how do you avoid having it become the factor? In other words, if a given college, private or public, had two students in front of the college to, consider one or the other gets the slot in school. And you say, well, both the students are about equivalent in SAT scores, in all the other measures, metrics you can use, like GPA and such, and maybe even the same in other extracurricular activities that the student's been involved in, like student government and things like that, but one is black and one is white. How do you avoid having that become the determining veto or affirmation of that student?
Well, one, you eliminate the use of race as part of that consideration, and you have to replace it with consideration of other factors, race-neutral factors. And we've got 9 states right now that have outlawed the use of race in higher education, as far back in one case as 1996. And those institutions boast strong diversity rates, but also maintain their academic competitiveness. And it can be done, and the focus has to shift away from the simple checking of a box on an application and fitting within the quote appropriate racial classification for admission purposes. And higher ed has to do a better job at analyzing individual applications, not just from a myopic or a singular viewpoint, but a much broader individualized assessment of how students are going to contribute to the educational environment. And that's going to mean they focus their shift to things, or refocus their shift to things like socioeconomic status and geographical status and or diversity, ideological diversity. Wouldn't it be nice to have some ideological diversity on our campuses?
I would love to see it in the faculty. I mean, because the last time I saw numbers, and I haven't seen anybody produce numbers in a while, but I saw one college where they had 300 faculty members and 8 of them were registered Republicans. And I'm willing to bet that most of those 8 were probably what I call country club Republicans or establishment Republicans rather than real conservatives. So you say you essentially have one ideological point of view on that college. Who in the world, sitting as a Board of Trustees member, says, oh, this is a good thing if we just have an entire campus faculty that only reflects one general point of view and the other point of view is not present at all? Does anybody think that's good?
Well, no, and I mean, I think you're exactly right on that point. And institutions, if they really are dedicated to diversity, then it must be a much more broader-based diversity and not just solely exclusively limited to race of an individual student. It does a great deal of disservice, and it does nothing more than perpetuate racial stereotypes for college administrators to believe that they can predict the views and experiences of a student based only exclusively on their skin color. Skin color is never a predictor or a proxy for life experience. We need to form a much larger basis of analysis on issues of diversity, like economics, like regions of the country, like ideology, like experience, in place of, again, that singular focus on race. And it's ironic, we don't use race as a factor when hiring faculty and staff. We don't use it when awarding scholarships or financial aid. The High Court's been very clear that students' race cannot be used when making elementary or secondary educational school assignments. So the question really is, why are we allowing race to be used in this one very narrow category of college admissions? And again, I think that's going to weigh very heavily in the decision of the court moving forward.
I'm talking to Ken Tashi, who's a campus reform higher education fellow, although I might push back on one area when you say we don't use race or ethnic background in choosing faculty. I seem to remember Harvard being exceptionally proud of hiring Elizabeth Warren, the Native American, as she put herself on her bar registration card in Texas, and that she claimed that status. And Harvard said, oh, look at this. We've got the first Native American college professor at Harvard, I believe, or maybe the first female one. They were very proud of that. And it seems to me that did play a role in deciding to hire her.
Sure, but I'm going to assume Harvard's going to claim that they didn't base the decision on her race or national origin or alleged Indian heritage. But the reality is, if a decision of an institution, whether in hiring or in admissions, it has the purpose or effect of still seeking to create a racially proportionate student body, that still amounts to nothing more than racial balancing, the use of racial quotas, which is all illegal under federal law. So institutions are still going to have to be very, very cautious if they think they can, run a back end around the prohibition on the use of race with an effort to try to masquerade that as something else.
I want to see color-blind admissions. Bring in the students who show the best on the test scores. And if you want to bring economics into it, you can do that, but you can't do it as just a camouflage for using race instead. Ken Tashi, former general counsel for 20 years at 15 different institutions of higher education. Ken, thanks very much for the time. Hey, if aging muscles and joints are slowing you down, do what I did. Lars here for Gen Pop Extra Strength CBD Cream from Generic CBD. Folks, this stuff's amazing. It's guaranteed to work or your money back. Rub it into your knees, your elbows, your shoulders, and your back, and especially your hands. It melts right into muscle and joints, and it goes to work fast. Plus, it's a fantastic moisturizer. It's from our friends at Generic CBD, where you can save up to 75% on CBD. It's not sold in stores, but my listeners get a trial size bottle, 10 treatments for $9.95. That is a $20 value, and it's not a subscription. Shipping is free. To order, go to rubitin.com. That's rubitin.com, or call 740-RUB-IT-IN. That's 740-RUB-IT-IN. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show, so tell Alexa to play The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Well, there's a big vote, and it happens tonight, and what it decides is whether or not the deal that was worked out between Kevin McCarthy, House Speaker, Republican, over on the House side of things on Capitol Hill, and the deal he worked out with Joe Biden or Joe Biden's handlers, somebody that he worked it out with, that whether or not that deal is even going to get approval in the House of Representatives. So I thought I'd go to a member of the minority party in the U.S. Senate, and that's Ted Budd, Republican from North Carolina. Senator Budd, welcome back to the program. How are you?
Lars, it's great to be with you. I might be in the minority today, but we're working towards the majority. So appreciate you being in the fight with us.
Well, I am, and I want you to be in the majority because we could actually you could deliver to Joe Biden a budget deal that actually got the things done that we wanted the House to get done. Should the Republicans on the House side pass this deal to head off default on the debt, whether it's numerical or mythical or real, if we hit that June 5th date and they haven't passed this, should they vote this through? Does it give enough cuts in government spending to justify a fairly large increase in borrowing authority for the U.S. government?
There was a letter from Mike Lee a month or two ago, and it said, look, 43 Republican senators signed. Some other people behind the scenes said they are in agreement with it. So there's 6 others, a handful of others that said they agree that we shouldn't pass a clean debt ceiling because we need significant spending reforms. I was one of those. But I don't think that what has come out of the House or what soon will be out of the House is significant spending reform. Essentially, it greenlights $4 trillion in new debt. It normalizes pandemic levels of spending. So it might be a minute cut, but it's of a higher baseline as a result of the 2020 and beyond spending.
Right.
It keeps most of the IRS funding. They may talk about rescinding $1.4 billion, but what about the $80 billion that pays for all those new IRS agents? I think it's got weak work requirements. Look, nobody wants default. I understand it. I'm grateful for Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans going to the table. Had they not been in the fight, Lars, they would not even gotten anything out of Joe Biden. But this is the problem when you don't have the presidency, when you don't have the Senate majority, and you only have one thin majority in the House of Representatives, you can't get a whole lot of leverage. And so that's what we're ending up with. I don't like the bill, but I understand why we are where we are.
And that it sounds like, Senator Budd, that you expect that it will be voted through on the House side, and then it will be approved on the Senate side, and Joe Biden will sign it. So the guy who has no authority over spending or borrowing gets to drive the decision as to what actually comes to his desk. Is that fair to say?
That is unfortunately fair but look, he may not be in charge of that, but he does have 2 branches of the government. The Democrats have the Senate. They have the president and his administration. They're over the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. So, and spending is how they enlarge the government and how they increase control. We got to win the majority, but look, you can't default. We all lose if that happens, but I don't like where we are. I wish we could have done better. I wish we were in charge because we wouldn't be at this point had we been in the majority.
Would it make any sense to merely extend it a year so that it doesn't kick the can past the next presidential and Senate and House elections next year? Would it make more sense to say, no, you get a year. You're not getting to January of 25?
Well, I think your point is there, but I don't agree with the timeline. So if you said a year, I think that's too long. Why not give it a week or 2 and just keep going back, go back to stay away from default. You can keep pushing this back, increase the debt limit by a certain dollar amount. That's a problem in this current bill is that it gives a timeline until January of 25 to eliminate the spending limits, the debt limits. It doesn't give a dollar amount. It gives a time limit. So it's basically like not having a credit card limit on your kids' credit cards, but you have a time limit. Okay, you can spend all you want until Christmas. That's not a good idea, especially in the hands of the Biden administration. So I think we should do short-term CRs, go back to the table, get more out of this, but I don't think we should extend it a year. We got to deal with the problem, and we got to get to the root of these challenges.
I agree with you, Senator Budd. I'm talking to Senator Ted Budd from North Carolina, Republican, because when you talk about even the money where you wanted to claw back a lot of the COVID money that never got spent. Senator, I've been asking my audience, if a friend came to you and said, I'm really in a financial bind, can you help me out? Well, what do you need? I think I need $500. You loan him $500. A few weeks later, you say, hey, is your emergency still going out? No, we got it handled. Did it take more than the 500? Oh, no, I only spent 100. Okay, I'd like the other 400 back. No, it's kind of nice to have the 400. I'm going to keep it. Nobody would tolerate that nonsense, and yet that's just what they did. We have an emergency called COVID. We shovel out all this cash. A lot of it is still sitting out there, hundreds of billions of dollars, and the Congress says, hey, you didn't need it for the emergency. The emergency's over. And all the Democrats say is, no, let them keep the money and let us, I guess, continue to feed inflation. Am I wrong about any of that?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And I love the analogy. I mean, it is exactly what's going on right now. I mean, all the spending was driven, what Rahm Emanuel said years ago, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, boy, they sure took that to heart. They increased our spending by trillions of dollars. And now you're seeing government spending at 25% of GDP, roughly $20 trillion GDP. So it's absolutely consuming our economy right now. The amount of we're going to be paying on the interest will be overwhelming us in near term. So these are real problems. And like I said in my opening speech a week or so ago, the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil when Paul is talking to Timothy. But in Washington, D.C., it's modern monetary theory is the root of all evil. So that's what's going on here. And they think they can continue to print this to solve their problems, but it's making it harder on those in your listening audience, those back home, all of us that have work hard to put food on the table and are just dealing with getting in our pickup trucks and going to work every day. It's hard. And it's really spending. It's bad energy policy. It's bad spending policy. It's bad regulatory policy, which is everything that Joe Biden has been doing is making it life hard on regular, hardworking Americans.
Well, in some ways, what you say, especially because of the border issues, I know you went to the border. We don't have time to get to that, but I'll tell you this. Now that bad news is coming home to a bunch of Democrat mayors and governors of big fat blue cities like New York City, and they're all squealing like stuck pigs, I say it serves them right. If you're unhappy about, tens of thousands of illegals flooding into New York and Chicago and all these other big cities, tell you what, get on the phone to your friend Joe and tell him to shut that thing down because it was shut down very well by Donald Trump before Joe arrived. He created this problem. You now own it, New York City. Tough luck. Senator Budd, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I'm glad to see the people of North Carolina have great representation in the Senate.
God bless you, Lars. Thanks for having me.
Take care, and God bless you as well. That is Senator Ted Budd from North Carolina. Big decision tonight whether or not the House passes this crazy debt ceiling increase. And you heard what Senator Budd said. Why not just give them a couple of weeks and say, let's work harder, let's get that government cut down to size, and not borrowing far beyond its means. Back in a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. That's not what Joe Biden said, but it's what I say. Welcome to the program and to honestly provocative talk radio. If you want to jump into the conversation, we're going to talk to a naysayer here in just a moment. But just to set the context, our Twitter poll, when any child dies in a hot car, should someone face criminal charges? My answer to that is yes. Now, you say, but there have to be extraordinary circumstances where you're justified in forgetting your baby in a car, as just happened. Now, we know this happens almost every single summer in America. It happens all the way across the country. In this case, a 1-year-old baby left by his social worker mom when she went inside to do a shift at a hospital, left there for 9 hours. The car's temperature soared to north of 100 degrees. Sadly, the child perished because of that. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. They have not brought charges yet. They probably, they likely do in most cases that I've seen over the years. They'll bring charges, but not in every case. Sometimes they say, the mother was distracted by this, or the father was distracted by that, or they had a very, very busy day. I don't think any of those make sense. You cost a child that child's life. The child had no way to escape from that hot car. You were responsible. I think there ought to be some charges in every single case, unless somebody can tell me a circumstance under which forgetting about a child for 9 hours, more than a third of an entire 24-hour day, is justified. But Chandler is a naysayer. Hey, Chandler, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What do you and I disagree about today?
Well, hey, Lars, I do have that circumstance, and I will argue that it is plausible that you may not have known that your child was in your car.
Okay,
and I'll tell you the story. So I came home from lunch, and I had ate lunch real quick, and at the time I owned a skateboard store with a skate park in it, and I had always taken the kids back to the park with me if they'd wanted to go, whatnot. But I went to the bathroom, and while in the bathroom, said that my 4-year-old child would be loaded in her car seat in the way back of my Suburban on the driver's side. And while sitting in the car, while I was in the bathroom, all the kids are loaded up. I got in my car. Nobody told me that she was with me, and she had fallen asleep, so her head was kicked back to where I couldn't see her in my rearview mirror.
Who put her in the car?
Everybody got out.
Who put her in the car? No, Chandler?
Her
Who put
10-year-old stepbrother.
Okay.
And so he had, got excited and jumped out of the car and with his friends, and nobody knew. Now, thank God she was only in there for about 5 to 7 minutes. before I had to go back to my car and get something and heard her crying. And I was like, I was appalled that my wife at the time, and that actual choice of not telling me was what definitely led to a divorce. But like the irresponsibility of her not coming to me and saying, hey, by the way, the kid's going with you to the park or to work with you, your 4-year-old daughter. I mean, nobody told me. And so I was like, you know, I mean, it was, I was just appalled that I wasn't told by even her brother. I mean, her brother felt terrible at 10 that he had forgotten that she was in there. And
because
so
it very easily could have ended tragically, couldn't it?
If I had got sidetracked at work 2 hours later, oh yeah, it could have been. It was not a scorching 90-degree day, but it was in the 80s, and it definitely, she was in the 5 or 7 minutes she was in there, she was covered in sweat and completely almost dehydrated. It was, I mean, it was scary just in 7 minutes how quick a car heats up and a kid could just be covered in sweat and be that exhausted.
Do you know what I would do, Chandler? Here's why I took, I mean, because I didn't want to ask should sometimes charges be brought? Because that's true. Sometimes charges should be brought. The reason I did it as an absolute.
Brought up against my wife.
What if the DA had said, well, I'm going to present this to a grand jury, and then 12 citizens or 20 citizens, depending on the size of the grand jury, will make the decision whether or not a crime was committed? Because when I say charges should be
jail.
I don't know that that's true, because
I'm telling you that, no, here's the reason why I would have went to jail.
Why is that?
So years later, it was used against me in our divorce proceedings, and it was one of the leading reasons to why she had gotten custody temporarily of my daughter. It was that story that basically I had left my daughter in the car. Now, the judge didn't even want to hear my side of it. It was just prejudged that I was guilty of leaving a child in a car for 7 minutes, and she could have gotten, very badly injured. And
do you imagine, yes. Okay, then I understand your circumstances. Do you imagine that in most cases there is an adult who's in charge of that child and the adult fails in their duty to that child? Is that correct?
No.
You don't think most of the time it's that?
No, if I had known she was with me.
No, I know, but I'm not talking about your case. I'm saying almost every summer there are at least a dozen of these that we hear about. And what we usually hear is, I was really busy. I picked up the kids. I usually didn't take my child to daycare, but that day it was my job to take my child to daycare. And then on the way to work, I got a call from my boss, and I got caught up in the conversation. I drove right past the daycare all the way to work, and that happens a lot.
Yeah, and I could see me even maybe possibly making that mistake only because this morning I got a phone call as I was getting ready to drive off, and I forgot to hook my trailer up. I thought I'd had it hooked up. I got halfway to my job site. I'm like, oh, my trailer's not in my truck.
Okay, and I get all that, but Chandler, what I don't like is that usually after one of these child deaths, we hear that somebody was busy. We hear that somebody was depressed. Because of, say, postpartum depression, which is a real thing. But
then have somebody else watch your kids.
Then have somebody else watch your kids. The other thing I'd love to see, since a lot of it does seem to be the coincidence of daycare and responsibilities drop them off. Do you know what I think would be the easiest thing in the world? There are a bunch of things during the day, like turning on cameras or turning off switches that I have to do. And you know what I do? I put it in my phone. And I thought, I get reminders from my bank. I get reminders from a credit card company saying, by the way, your payment due date is coming up, and it's on auto pay, so who cares anyway? I would think that if every daycare in America could set up a system, which would be very easy, to say, if your child is supposed to be checked in by 8:30 every morning, and you are not checked in within 10 minutes of that time, we send a text to the parent who usually drops off the child and say, your child isn't here. Is there some explanation? And then if that parent doesn't respond in, say, 5 or 10 minutes, an email goes out to 2 or 3 other people saying, this child isn't here, hasn't been dropped off as usual within the time frame. Somebody tell us where the child is right now. And you could almost make it something on autopilot where a bunch of parents, mom, dad, somebody else all get notices, hey, the kid ain't here. Where's the child? The child's usually dropped off by 8:30 every morning. It hasn't happened. Tell us where that child is. That might literally save a lot of lives, and it wouldn't take a lot of effort or even a lot of technology. Chandler, great call. Thank you very much. A good naysayer for a change. By the way, Father's Day is right around the corner. Get Dad, I can tell you this, get Dad what he really wants. Omaha steaks, perfectly aged, always tender, and guaranteed delicious. The Father's Day experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to put a smile on the big guy's face this summer with hand-selected packages. Head over to omahasteaks.com and use my name, Lars, L-A-R-S, at checkout. You get $30 off your qualifying order. You can choose from a variety of mouth-watering packages, fork-tender bacon-wrapped filet mignon, other gourmet grillables like air-chilled boneless chicken breasts, burgers, jumbo franks, and a whole lot more. Don't forget to save room for dessert. Most gift packages come with 4 delicious caramel apple tartlets. I'm getting hungry just talking about it. Go to omahasteaks.com and use code LARS, L-A-R-S, to check out and get $30 off an unforgettable gift that is guaranteed to make Dad's day. Because if there's one thing we do know, it's that dads want steak. That's omahasteaks.com. Promo code LARS at checkout. Minimum order is required. See the site for details. omahasteaks.com. Back in just a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Glad to get your calls in just a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. As you know, for about 25 plus years, I've talked about illegal aliens as a problem for America. And now they have reached the new peak under Joe Biden. Approximately 9 million illegal crossings in the last 2.5 years under the Joe Biden presidency. And it seems that even a president who claims to have the border under control clearly does not. He's merely facilitating the illegal entry of literally millions of people into our country. So at that point, is it time for citizens to actually say, well, if you're not going to close the border to the United States and abide by your oath to faithfully execute the laws of the U.S., maybe it's time for citizens to do it. And the man who's written about that by investigating is James Varney, reporter for Real Clear Investigations. James, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Lars. Thanks for having me.
I want to ask you this. How do citizens manage to do this? Because I get lots of people who call and say, we're all going to go down to the border and do it. And I said, well, you don't have police powers. You do have the right to carry a firearm, but you have no right to, go out and shoot people because they're illegally crossing the border. So how are citizens managing to pull this off, and how's it working?
Well, everything you just said is right. I mean, in this group that we're writing about, Arizona Recon, they call themselves, they're like a private border patrol thing, and they don't have the power to make arrests. They do carry weapons, but that's just for self-defense. It's not like they're getting in shootouts with people there.
Right.
So what they're seeing is in that part of the Arizona border, it's much more of a conduit, I think, for drugs than it is for illegal aliens. So, for example, the videos that you might see of people in these Texas borders, and they've been swarming across for 2.5 years, whatever it is now. This is a little more deserted, kind of a desert-like area. And what they're doing is just gathering intelligence to share with local law enforcement and border patrol people, especially when they see a lot of activity, which, again, primarily is drugs.
Right. And that, it's important to stop that as well. James, tell me this, because in all the years I was a reporter, because I did do what you do, but not at the level you're doing it, but now I use my opinion, or I throw my opinion in along with some facts. But I always found that law enforcement was at best a little skeptical of citizens going out and assisting them, even when the citizens said, look, we're not going to do anything that's illegal. We're not going to try to act like police, but we want to help you out. How are the Border Patrol, CBP, and the other agencies of the federal government, how do they take this interaction with AZBR, Arizona Border Recon?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think your experience is true that they have found that. Well, what we did on this story was we worked with Keith Hansen, who's a vet. He's a former airborne Army soldier, and he writes for Soldier of Fortune magazine, which you might remember from back in the day.
I do.
It's a little different now. And Tim Foley, who is the head of the AZBR, he's also a former 82nd Airborne soldier. So it's a lot of vets, and there is, to some extent, these guys understand that they're being perceived by some people if on comments on Facebook. We all know what anonymous commenters might be worth. But they know they're perceived as kind of clownish or LARPs, these action role play kind of guys. Right. And I don't think, though, that the cops and the law enforcement do see them that way. I don't know. It's hard for me to say how often they act on the intelligence that Arizona Recon might give them, but they aren't dismissive of them. I'll give them credit for that. And I think that Foley has developed a pretty good relationship with a number of people, both local and federal, so that these guys, while they might get mocked, again, by the anonymous comment stream on the internet, are not being treated disdainfully by the cops and the Border Patrol.
I'm talking to James Varney. You can read the whole story at Real Clear Investigations. But let me ask you, because I see kind of a comparison to be made. Do you remember Curtis Sliwa's Guardian Angels? And to some extent, what they did was, if a bunch of guys in red berets all get on the subway in New York, I've never lived there, but I've visited there and I've seen them at work. Their mere presence, which is one of the things even cops are told works pretty well, mere presence. The cops show up, bad guys often stop doing what they're doing. Does their mere presence there do some good to dissuade people from trying to cross illegally?
Well, it did with Sliwa. I lived in New York City then, and I was going to Columbia then, and you would see Guardian Angels with their red berets in the subway system. And exactly as you said, it's just to kind of dissuade activity more than it is to combat it if it breaks out, right? Like, I think they used to say that those guys were martially trained or whatever. But again, we have here with the Arizona guys, people who are trained in this. Many of them are vets. And I think that they do at least offer some kind of visual deterrent. So you'll see, for those of people that read the piece, you'll see that there are cartel guys who are armed frequently on the other side. And Heath talked about how they've built like tunnels, they have like an entire headquarters over there on the other side, and they've got weapons and everything like that. So when they see these guys, it makes them at least either have to go somewhere else, right? You guys know, and I'm sure your listeners know about the balloon effect, or decide not to do it. So exactly that. It has a deterrence value, even if they're not making arrests and busts and things like that.
Well, especially if the cartels know, if we're seen by AZBR, even though they can't do arrests, they can certainly call, if they've got a good working relationship with CBP, they can call them and say, hey, we got a group crossing over here, looks like they're headed for the highway. Because trying to guard a 2,000-mile-long border, of which, 700 or 800 miles has some barrier on it, but most of it does not, becomes really difficult. But if you say, but there are pathways that once we know they're coming this way, they're almost certain to come down this canyon because it leads to that highway where people will be picked up, especially if they're drug mules, that if they know, CBP is going to be all over us when we get to the highway because AZBR has tipped them off. And it's another set of eyes, right?
Yeah, and I think a good indication of the fact that they must be doing something is the fact that the cartel tried to buy them off. So they got phone calls from a federale who offered him guns or money or whatever they wanted, and he said, well, why would my enemy want to give me that? And they said, well, because then we wouldn't be enemies. And when he refused, they upped the amount. And when he refused that, they finally told him, okay, then we're just going to put a price on your head.
Wow.
So fortunately, nothing has happened there. But I don't see that the cartel would be going through all that trouble and offering tens of thousands of dollars to stop these guys if they didn't have any positive effect from our point.
I'm talking to James Varney, who's the author of this great piece from Real Clear. But do you suppose they tried it on the north side of the border because that's the way it works on the south side? If you've got a cop, who's actually going to try and do his job, you say, look, could we persuade you not to? Get on the take with us. Well, now you've compromised him, and he's agreed to let your people go by. If it works south of the border, they might have thought, well, it'll work just as well north of the border, too.
Yeah, I'm sure that was part of their thinking. I mean, we know that is part of the culture with the way that they operate down there. And look, I think we all know that there's been plenty of examples of corruption in a lot of police forces in the U.S., not constant, but, famous examples. They make movies of it, right? Like Serpico. Stuff like that. So You can't blame them for trying. I think it's also a reflection of just how much money they're making on all this, So you got federal prosecutors in San Diego who have said that something in the neighborhood of 2/3 of all the fentanyl that they captured, and we know that's just a fraction of what's coming in, But 2/3 of what they were capturing last year was coming right there in the southwest part of the border, the U.S. border. So the cartel is also making money off of people that are immigrating. Okay, they're shepherding that and getting a cut of that, and they have so much money that it's easy for them to offer bribes like this, right?
Well,
I mean, that's $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month is a lot of money to people here, you and me, but to them, that's nothing. So
no, I mean, if you do the math, if you figure the number of 9 million times $2,000 each on average to get them across as coyotes, 9 million times 2,000, even I can do that math. That's James Varney. You can read the whole story at Real Clear Investigations. We'll be back in a moment. I'll get to your phone calls and emails. Back in a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. Can you figure out how major corporations worth tens of billions of dollars like Target and Anheuser-Busch and the Disney Corporation, can you figure out how those major companies that are worth so much money, ordinarily when you have a big company like that, they safeguard their reputation. They watch out to make sure that every single decision they make is one that, whether ethical or not, is still going to lead to a bigger bottom line. And yet these major corporations, one right after another, have simply done themselves in. Now, the latest, of course, is Target. But I think it's worth noting this, and then I'll get to your calls. But I think it's worth noting that all of these companies, except for some of the first ones that did this kind of nonsense, had plenty of fair warning. Don't go down this road. If you go woke, you're going to go broke. And I know they thought, oh, that's just a clever slogan from those conservative MAGA types. It doesn't actually work in the real world. Well, as a matter of fact, the marketplace works brilliantly. Now, I've told you before that I'm a big believer in the marketplace. If a company decides to do stupid things and they lose a whole bunch of business, that's the way the marketplace works. I don't sponsor boycotts, but I certainly vote with my wallet. And I encourage you to vote with your wallet. The reason I don't sponsor boycotts is I don't think you need to be led to a decision to say, I'm not going to spend money with a company whose values, as they project them in public, are not my values. I know that you're smart enough to make that decision on your own. And if you think that my decision not to buy a certain product or a certain service from a big company because of politics, because of the way the company acts, well, in that case, that's okay. That's your decision, and not mine. And I don't think you'd be led to a boycott by me to stop spending your money there just because, well, if Lars says I shouldn't spend my money, then I won't do it. I'm not that arrogant. I make what I think are good decisions for myself. But consider this. I love the way Not the Bee wrote it up, because when I looked at one of the financial stories, and I'm not that close a follower of financials, but I can certainly read this. Target, this huge retailer that is present in most places in America, has lost in the last 2 weeks, in 14 days, they have lost almost $13 billion of the entire company's value. And the company's valuation has dropped from $61.6 billion. They've dropped by almost 1/4. They are off tremendously. And you say, what does that mean? It means that the company is right in front of us in what they've described as free fall. As Not the Bee reported a few days ago, the company was posting $9 billion in declines. Now the drop has increased by more than 30% to almost $13 billion in declines. Just yesterday, Target shares fell 3.66% in a single day. That is the 8th straight decline, and it whacked off $2.4 billion in the entire market capitalization of the company. It's unbelievable. And why is this happening? Because the company decided to go woke. Because they said, we're going to have a gay pride collection. Well, guess who that was tied to? A designer by the name of Eric Carnell of Abprallen. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's Abprallen, Abprallen. This guy is an outspoken, openly Satanist whose brand features occult imagery and messages like Satan respects pronouns on some of its branded apparel. Now, I understand if you're a young adult and you want to buy stuff at Target like that, say, I want to buy the Satan stuff at Target, go ahead. But can you imagine a parent saying, why, my children need to be introduced to these alternative ideas, so I think I'll make them familiar with Satan by buying some of the Satan-branded, clothing and that sort of thing. The losses are still going on after 14 days. There is a boycott. that was triggered by Target's release of so-called Pride, an LGBTQ-friendly line. You say, well, what's gay-friendly clothing? Well, in this case, it's transgender-friendly clothing, and I try to keep this a family show, so just take this for what it's worth. They feature women's swimwear with an extra crotch room to make it tuck-friendly. And if you say, well, what are women and girls tucking there? And you say, well, those aren't, well, they're women, I guess, in today's woke society. They're biological men who have to tuck stuff away so that they can appear to be a woman. And what could possibly go wrong with that? So Target is getting punished the same way that Anheuser-Busch, for its Bud Light adventure with Dylan Mulvaney, the transgender, they're now off something like 26 or 27% in sales. They're practically giving the beer away, saying, would you please take some of this beer? They've become the butt of so many jokes because they've made themselves the butt of so many jokes, and I'm glad to see it happen. To your calls now at 866 Hey Lars. Let's start with Ron. Hey, Ron, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
Well, my brother, besides the one man, one vote situation that I feel like they're going back to Jim Crow laws on American citizens, that's going to take the Republican Party to a deep hole of one party like in Mexico. The main point I'm calling is the lack of willpower to hold accountable in our Congress. And I'm very sad to see that they compromise again. It sounds like we got the same thing going on in the Oregon House on principles, on accountability. You got a $4 billion, you're going to give them a $4 billion credit card? Trillion dollars. And to spend
$4 trillion. I hate to, I know, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Soon enough, you're talking about real money. $4 trillion and kick the decision-making all the way to January of 25 when Donald Trump will be president. He'll walk in and inherit that mess.
So they're like cutting out power for themselves, room for negotiation. And at the same time, we, the taxpayers, going to have to pay for it. On top of the illegal aliens that's using our services in the state of Oregon and throughout the country, and homeless drug addicts that wants to get $1,000 a month that we spent $350 million in Oregon State's budget. How much
the only thing I want to ask you, though, Ron, let's stick to the Congress, okay? In the Congress, you say it's a lack of willpower. To some extent, I agree with you, but they're even having a tough time getting somebody to compromise on this. So should we just let the company go? You know, if we say we're not going to approve a bill unless you give a certain amount of cuts in government spending, and they barely have the votes to pass this compromise, what's going to happen if they say, okay, we're just not going to do the deal? America goes into default, and Joe Biden and the major media will be happy to blame the conservatives for doing it, even though he's the one who made this happen.
I agree with you on that sense, Lars, but the main point is this. They should have just done it for 3 weeks at the max. They should be able to say for every dollar that you want, besides military, besides the Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, we got to talk real cuts on these businesses are feasible. I mean, Oregon's getting 7-to-1 federal money compared to 30 years ago from the federal government.
Ron, thanks very much. I appreciate the call. If you want to dial into the best conversation in talk journalism, it's 866 Hey Lars. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And of course, you can always vote in our Twitter poll. Our question is, because we've now had in the last week 2 babies die elsewhere in America, one here in the Northwest where I live, one elsewhere, both of them because somebody forgot about the baby in the car on a hot day. When any child dies in a hot car, should somebody face criminal charges? And my answer is yes.